In the center of the planet, there sleeps the great Earth Dragon, a being of incomprehensible might. So immense is his power that even his dreams change the world, granting special individuals on the surface extraordinary powers beyond those of mortal men. This is the Earth of the Mirage universe, and you're listening to the Mirage Barrage. The stretch limousine rolled down the city streets, surrounded on either side by towering skyscrapers. Ethan Swanson didn't have eyes for the sights passing by, however. He was focused inward, wondering about the deal he had just made not minutes before. One way or another, it was because of the Gargoyle that his family was gone. There was no denying that. But without his help, Ethan may never find them again. There was no denying that either. He had to take the chance, but he couldn't help the gnawing feeling at the base of his skull that this would go wrong. He would have to try, but he needed a backup plan too. Nothing could be left to chance. The limo pulled up to a large tower of golden stone and crisp blue glass, adorned by a giant LE sigil at the top. Caldwell Sinclair, or the man pretending to be the billionaire CEO, stepped from the car when an assistant opened the door. He glanced back to see if Ethan would follow. Ethan had been trying his best to ignore Sinclair, the Gargoyle, during the ride, and in turn Sinclair had respected that. It took a moment for Ethan to be brought back to reality and exit the vehicle. When he did, Sinclair nodded and they walked towards the large downtown headquarters of Laudable Electronics. Inside the enormous foyer was glass and marble everywhere. All the employees nodded reverently towards Sinclair and some stared jealously after Ethan trailing along behind, out of place in his t-shirt and jeans. A quick ride up an elevator and they arrived outside Sinclair's office. A beautiful secretary smiled broadly at Caldwell as they walked towards his office. She leaned in close to pass him some important folders before his hand touched the knob. When he and Ethan had stepped through the door, Ethan commented dryly, "Really living it up, aren't you?" "Shut up," Sinclair replied, uncharacteristically snappish. Ethan raised an eyebrow, but Sinclair merely slumped into his plush, oversized office chair. Ethan decided that was his cue to take a seat opposite the desk. After a moment in which Sinclair's features reverted to a cool neutrality, he placed the tips of his fingers against each other and said, "Let's get down to business. You want to find your family, and I want my body back. There's some details to hash out, such as who gets who first." "My family," Ethan immediately replied. "I need to make sure you keep your end of the bargain." "I shouldn't be surprised," Sinclair grumbled. "And I doubt I will move you from that point, but I have a counter-demand." "Really?" Ethan asked, bracing himself for an intense negotiation. "Indeed," Sinclair replied coolly. "Your family is a rather simple matter, but my body is lost in an unknown dimension. It will take more to find what I want. I ask that we find the coordinates to my body first." Ethan refrained from scoffing, but only just. He settled for asking, "How is that not just finding your body first?" "You need me to travel to Dimension Warp, and I will commit to traveling to your family first once we get their coordinates," Sinclair offered. But Ethan immediately rejected it. "No way. I wasn't born yesterday. Yeah, you have the warp technology, so if I give you the coordinates first, there's nothing guaranteeing that you won't just bail on our agreement. Finding my family first means finding their coordinates first." "I suppose you have a fair point in that regard," Sinclair replied mildly. "But then you have to realize my next request." "What?" Ethan asked suspiciously. "You pointed out our agreement is shaky, so we need to need each other as long as possible. If I give you both the coordinates and the ability to travel, you will have no reason to uphold your end of the bargain." It was Ethan's turn to grumble. "Just get to the counter-proposal." He could see where this was going. "I'll give you the coordinates to your family first, but we go to my body first," Sinclair suggested. "But that just puts us right back to where we started. You could ditch me," Ethan pointed out. "You have the warp tech, you have to wait to get your body." "But you do understand you will have to wait until I get the coordinates to my body before I can take you to your family." Ethan didn't say anything, mulling it all over in his head. "Complicated, isn't it?" Sinclair asked. There was a slight weariness in his voice that spoke to Ethan. Something that said that he too didn't enjoy thinking of the complexities of working out such a deal, but had been forced to time and time again.
There is no easy solution, and yet we both need each other. However, I can offer you one possible mitigating factor, a suggestion.
Go on, Ethan said. It was a dubious hope, but maybe, just maybe, the Gargoyle could offer something reasonable here.
The dimension in which my body lays, Sinclair said. The dimension between dimensions, the negative pocket dimension. It has a unique signature. The technique to find my body may be slightly different from the technique to find your family. Namely, we need not rely solely on Ansible records and signal tracking. Instead, the dimension I am seeking emits a unique dark energy signal. In short, your dark energy receptor could be quite useful to me.
So how does this help our predicament? Ethan prompted.
I propose the following steps. First, you refine your dark energy receptor to the point where it can find the signal I'm looking for. Then, you may either lock the device or hold back the adjustments as you see fit. I only ask for a brief demonstration to see that you have indeed refined the technology appropriately. Then, I can provide the signal records for my suit, which you can combine with your Ansible node to track down your family. We will recover your family, and then you will hand over the code or the final adjustments, and I use that to find and recover my body.
Ethan considered for a long minute. It wasn't perfect, hardly. But... Fine, he said. That's as good as we're probably going to get.
Most likely, Sinclair concurred. So, are we agreed?
Agreed.
Then let's see it, Sinclair prompted. The Ansible node.
Ethan winced. About that...
You're about to leave me gravely disappointed, aren't you? Sinclair sighed.
Well, I left it in the ethereal hawk, Ethan admitted.
Utterly fantastic. What a wonderful start.
Well, what? Did you expect me to be fighting you with it tucked under my arm? Did you see me waving it around in my hand?
Yes, very well, fine. Then I suppose I will just have to go and get it then.
No, absolutely not, Ethan declared firmly, stopping Sinclair as he was rising from his chair.
What? Sinclair asked incredulously. How can you expect us to make any progress without the Ansible node? How can you find your family?
I'm not going to let you terrorize those people anymore.
I won't terrorize them. I'll just take the node.
Yeah, because that's something you can just go and do. You said I can act as your conscience. I'm putting my foot down. Unless you take me with you, maybe.
You would travel with me without your suit? Sinclair asked, appearing mildly surprised.
What? No, of course not, Ethan shot back at once.
Well, I'm not taking the chance that you and your friends will concoct something to team up against me when we arrive, Sinclair explained as patiently as he could. Fine, forget the starship. You will have to construct a new one.
And repair my suit, Ethan added.
I'm sure, Sinclair said, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. But that is only fair. We cannot expect to trust each other without being on equal footing.
Yeah, something like that.
Well then, you will need a workshop.
Sinclair stepped into the huge room and pulled the large lever on the wall. One by one, giant lights suspended 50 feet into the air buzzed to life. They illuminated a huge room with racks of tools on one side, a bank of computers on the other, and lots of raw materials and machinery scattered about on tables or on the floor. There was everything from tiny circuits on the tables to giant mechanical assembly arms placed on the ground. More large machinery was hidden under great white sheets.
This entire room is at your disposal, Sinclair said, waving into the vast space. You can be assured that it is completely private as well.
Not that I'm going to take your word for it, Ethan mumbled.
By all means, check for yourself, Sinclair replied, unbothered by the remark. We need trust if this deal is going to work. You won't find anything, but do check. I need you to see that I'm not lying here.
Right. So you're telling the truth on this one, Ethan said, leaving the implication about future statements of Sinclair's unspoken.
If you would rather be done with this deal, then let's have out with it, Sinclair said at once.
No, you're right, Ethan backpedaled. I'll check for myself. Sinclair calmed as well.
There's a requisition computer over there, he said, gesturing towards one of the monitors. Anything you need, just request it. Depending on whether it's in stock, we can get it to you within the day. The computer should estimate time for delivery on other items.
Ethan nodded, already walking through the maze of materials provided for him. Based on a first glance, there should be more than enough, at least in terms of raw materials. The tools he saw also seemed to be state-of-the-art and varied enough for any of his needs. Then again, you never really knew what you needed until you were in the middle of the project, did you? Sinclair, seeing Ethan lost in wonder at everything, turned to leave the room. Just as he did so, Ethan pulled a large sheet from one of the big machines.
Sinclair!
Ethan shouted at once, outraged.
What is all of this?
Caldwell Sinclair stopped and turned, a single eyebrow raised. He evidently couldn't imagine what would provoke such a reaction in Ethan. Looking at the now uncovered round purple machine towering over Ethan, he understood.
Don't tell me you're surprised, Sinclair chided mildly.
Ethan was standing next to a resource recycler appropriated from the Ethereal Hawk. Behind it was a fabricator from the same location.
You knew I raided that dimension, Sinclair continued. I told you their equipment was quite useful. I figured that your clearly upgraded suit would need these tools in its repair. Was I mistaken?
Well, no, actually, but that's not the point, Ethan said, slightly taken aback by Sinclair's callousness. I'm playing the leash card again.
How? Sinclair demanded, incredulous again. I'm not doing anything.
Yeah, well, we're gonna fix that. Once I get my suit fixed, we're taking this and anything else you've taken back.
Oh?
Yes, Ethan insisted. We're returning all of this stuff.
I don't think you understand, Sinclair clarified. My objection is to the we in that statement. In case you've forgotten, I'm not willing to put myself in between you and the Ethereal Hawk. If you insist, I will return these items, but you will not be coming with me.
Ethan hesitated. Fine, he conceded, but quickly added, but I get to watch, and you have to leave as soon as I say.
Demanding, aren't we? Very well, though. If that's what you want, it is a simple request, Sinclair said.
He waited to see if there would be any more protests from Ethan, but when it became clear that there weren't going to be, he turned and left. Ethan turned back towards the mountains of equipment. The Gargoyle had been right about one point. He would need some of the tech from Slant City, the Ethereal Hawk, if he was going to repair his suit. Now he knew he had everything he needed here, except the suit itself. Ethan burst through the door of Jason Malkowski's shop just before closing. The last few customers glanced at him nervously as he shot past and slammed his hands down on the table. Jason, I need some stuff, Ethan announced.
It's about time. Your suit's been taking up enough room, Jason grumbled.
No, I need some other stuff from the shop.
Do you have any money?
What? No, of course not.
Then I have nothing for you, Jason replied, shrugging.
Frustrated, Ethan asked, Are you being intentionally difficult?
Difficult? Jason asked, astounded. Do I have to remind you that you stole my merchandise, have consistently refused to pay me back, and seem to be under the impression that my store is some sort of personal clubhouse for you?
Whoa, calm down, Ethan said, taken aback by the sudden intensity. It's not like I hurt you or anything.
You truly have no concept of money or business, do you? Jason asked, face falling.
I know money's important, Ethan replied simply.
Forget it. The only business we have is your repayment for the merchandise, and you're picking up your stuff. You're lucky I'm not calling the cops, but based on all the nonsense you've gotten yourself into, I doubt they would do any good anyway. Bottom line, if you're not here to pay your debts or pick up your stuff, I have no reason to interact with you.
Dude, come on. I don't have any money. I'm working at Simulator to repay them for the suit. If I could, I'd repay you.
Well, I'm sorry you can't.
Look, I have an idea. I think I can outsmart the Gargoyle. I just need a few more things. Some things from Simulator, which I can...
Simulator? Oh no, I'm not getting dragged into that. It's bad enough that I'm holding on to stolen merchandise of theirs.
I have a plan. It's not a big deal. We just have to...
Ethan, why should I risk it? Why should I put my trust in you? I have plenty to lose. And when you had the chance to listen to my advice, you ignored it. So please, tell me, why in the world should I be going out on a limb for you?
Because this is going to be awesome.
I'll settle for my little boring life. Goodbye, Ethan.
Can I at least get the suit? Ethan asked.
Please, Jason replied as he stood up.
He reached up towards the back shelf where several high-priced gadgets were placed. Among them were several green things labeled with exorbitant prices.
You know, this absurd trick of yours would have been easier if you hadn't drowned the suit in the lake first, Jason muttered.
I had to do something until I could store it, Ethan replied defensively.
Well, I'm just glad to get this off of my shelves, Jason replied, pulling out several cardboard boxes whose contents would certainly not match the images on the outside.
Jason slid the packages over to Ethan.
That'll be $94,000, he said.
You take credit cards, right? Ethan asked.
Not from you.
Smart man. Ethan grabbed the piles and piles of boxes and tech and started dragging them outside.
It seems our newest employee is more than we bargained for,
Chroma Computer said to the room. The two agents, known simply as Right and Left, sat at the round conference table with Chroma Computer's cylindrical capsule hanging over the middle of it all.
We have to assume the worst, Right declared. The reason he could so easily hide his identity and break into our headquarters is because he is in the employ of Caldwell Sinclair.
I hate referring to him with that name, Left said. You know the real Caldwell Sinclair isn't responsible.
I'm not dignifying a name like the Gargoyle, Right shot back. Let us return to the point at hand,
Chroma Computer gently reminded them.
It has been proposed that the being known only as Steven Stevenson has always been a spy.
It would make sense that the Gargoyle would want to steal the exosuit, Left said in acknowledgement. The technology could likely improve his own mechanical body, or even help him reverse engineer it.
Well, Sinclair won't, Wright observed. He'll have people to do it for him, but I see your point. And we've blundered into his trap. The deal we proposed is useless now.
Indeed, Chroma Computer noted neutrally.
All efforts to maintain surveillance on Stevenson have been thwarted by Pseudo-Sinclair's agents. Even if we were to invest the resources to counteract the interference around Stevenson, we would be unlikely to have the capability of capitalizing on the information. Simulator is still reeling from recent events, and a confrontation with Sinclair has been costly in the best of times.
So what are we proposing? Left asked. We're not saying that we just give up.
We can continue to monitor his work here, but honestly, at this point, we should consider simply firing him, Wright said, defeated. I disagree, Chroma Computer countered. Well, certainly we can't just let him muck about in our systems, can we? Wright replied, confused. Certainly not, the computer agreed, but we should not remove any remaining advantages we have. I propose we assign meaningless tasks to Stevenson for his work. In the meantime, we may glean some information, however minor, from his activities within our own facilities.
Keep your enemies closer, eh? Left suggested.
To use the common vernacular, yes, Chroma confirmed. I don't know how much we're going to be learning from his 9 to 5, Wright said hesitantly.
I doubt much, Left shrugged.
But it would be foolish to disregard any advantage, Chroma pointed out.
Agreed, Left and Right said simultaneously. In a moment of surprise, they glanced at each other, then broke the gaze.
Excellent,
Chroma Computer said, apparently unaware of what just happened.
But there may be another matter worth discussing.
Ethan had a lot on his plate. During the day, he was working at Simulator, and at night, he was working on his suit, or the Ansible, or the dark matter receptor. While he was at his job, he felt frustrated he wasn't in the workshop. While he was in the workshop, he was tired from working at Simulator. He had virtually no time to unwind, and the only thing that kept him moving forward was the thought of making progress, of reaching his goal. The suit could be fixed, and he could make a new Ansible node. Those were only a matter of time. Sure, every setback was frustrating. Every minor detail of his invention that he forgot was incredibly annoying. He had made the darn thing in the first place. It should be easier to recreate it, right? Fixing the suit was easier in that it was less complicated, but more difficult in that it was often very dull. Applying a new ablative coating took time, not brain power. And while he needed a rest during that time, it also meant he wasn't using his brain, not applying his full potential. That, in turn, meant he couldn't rest while this was happening without feeling like he was wasting time. He had to remind himself of the necessity of sleep. about how much he would put himself behind by working through the night. He had to value his own health. It was a strange new problem to encounter. He was used to just doing what he wanted, and in doing so, he always had felt just fine. He'd get enough sleep because he'd sleep when he was tired. Now he didn't have enough hours in the day. He didn't want to sleep, but he had to. Of course, once the simple repairs to the suit were done, then the real fun would begin. He had scoured every inch of the warehouse and couldn't find a single bug in there. Maybe the Gargoyle really was leaving him alone. Ethan wasn't going to count on it, but he could afford a bit of a risk now that he had checked it out. He could work on half of his plan in the workshop. The other half... It didn't take long for Ethan to figure out a way to automate much of the armor repairs, and that freed him up to prepare the next phase of his plan. While the suit would be repaired in the workshop, Ethan went to play games. Every day after work, for a week, Ethan walked out of his little office, stepped through the back door, and into the arcade. Ethan had smuggled out some of the requisitioned parts from Laudable Electronics and sold them for petty cash. This cash was then used to pay for the time in the simulator arcades. Ethan made sure to use different simulator tubes each time, and he generally picked them at random. The first couple he used, he merely tried playing around to access the game's code. He figured out how relatively easily and would just mess around during the game. He made sure to find and delete all of his and his sister's records in the games just to be extra sure. But most of the time he was just doing silly things like changing the color of the sky or adding sombreros to all of the enemies. He'd revert all of these changes before his time was up, making sure everything was exactly as it was before he hacked it. Well, everything but the scores. Then, the next day, he'd glance over to see if Simulator had done anything with the tube he'd messed with. It didn't seem like they had. They'd probably checked it, but that was it. Of course, they would have known all of the changes Ethan had made during his time. They recorded the gameplay sessions. Ethan had seen left and right download the data when he first broke in. But now, he had a way around that. Having quickly mastered the code of the games, Ethan set up a fake log of his gameplay. Considering he had already established a pattern of just messing with the game's codes, the logs were quite easy to fake. He didn't have to actually play the scenarios or fake playing them. He didn't have to accurately model his reaction time or judge how difficult things were. No, he just had to make a log of him changing an NPC's dialogue to recordings of Alice Cooper or something. Meanwhile, he was free for the real fun. Ethan wouldn't actually play the games or even hack the scenarios themselves. The logs would show that, but it wasn't what he was doing. He was actually busy setting up hardware failures. A few carefully changed variables here and there in the OS, and he would ensure that after another 50 runs or so, the tube would short out and a critical component would blow. Sure enough, a couple of days later, and one of those tubes he had played in was labeled out of order. Now, Ethan couldn't do this to every tube he played in, that would be too obvious. But he could make sure a few minor components needed to be replaced in a few of the ones he chose, and by switching up his methods of sabotage, he could make sure they failed at different times. Unless Simulator was keeping real careful track of which tubes he used, the pattern wouldn't be obvious. A yellow tube would fail a week after he played it, where the green tube failed a day after he went in, but the green tube would still fail before the yellow tube, even though he played in the yellow tube first. Things like that. When this was spread across 4 separate tubes over a long period of time, it would be hard to pin down the exact cause. Tubes needed maintenance after all. They were complex pieces of machinery that were used quite often. Why would anyone suspect that Ethan was sabotaging them? What would that get him except more debt, right? Well, there was one thing. When Simulator was forced to throw out the irreparable parts, Ethan was quick to snatch them from the waste piles. No one monitored what they threw out too carefully, which made the process extremely easy. Ethan would grab some of the parts, smuggle them to his secret hideout, and start rebuilding them. One simulator suit would be thrown out because the kinesthetic processor was fused. Then an axon-axis line would be replaced for a faulty power strip. But would you look at that? It has a working kinesthetic processor. Or maybe a chipset would be too damaged to be worth repairing for Simulator, but for Ethan, he could sink some time into rebuilding it. Through carefully planned sabotage, Ethan would eventually rebuild his own simulator tube, even upgrading it, because he wasn't going to use it to simply simulate past battles. No, he needed it to transmit and receive. And all of that was out of sight of the Gargoyle. If the Gargoyle was spying, he would, however, see the other half of the plan. Ethan wasn't just fixing the suit. He wasn't even upgrading it. He was completely remaking it. Simulator had thought of the exosuit as an armor for their best agent. The people of Slant City had envisioned it as a stronger armor. Now, Ethan was picturing it as something better. The Gargoyle had beaten him, and it had hurt. There was absolutely no reason it needed to hurt, but the Gargoyle had been clever in targeting the fleshy bits inside the suit. It was clever, but it had also served as an inspiration for Ethan. The Gargoyle was trapped in his metal body. Ethan wouldn't need to be trapped. He could be better. Ethan wasn't going to suffer the same disadvantage he had in the last fight. He wasn't going to make a new suit. He wore a suit. He was going to pilot an avatar. The exosuit was going to become his new persona, a drone remote-controlled from his personal simulator tube. Ethan built every mechanical muscle and motorized joint to mimic his own movements and enhance them. He quickly saw potential for even more power and started scrapping the interior of the suit. Why have a motor in the exosuit's elbow and a motor in the drone's elbow, both to bend the arm? Why not take out the exosuit motors and redesign the whole thing with a single larger motor that could work things out way more efficiently? And on that note, the tubes and pumps for the fluid modulators didn't have to be purely external either. Sure, Ethan would keep the external tanks, but he could add so much more capacity by, say, letting the tubes flow through the chest cavity. There weren't any organic lungs to take up space anymore. He could upgrade the fluid modulator generators or add a greater power supply or a few of his own gadgets. Even with the transmitters and receivers necessary to pilot the suit remotely, Ethan had nearly doubled the suit's abilities. The brilliant new design slowly came to life. A new power was being born, an icon forged. Soon, all that would be left would be a test run. Of course, until then, Ethan would have to keep his grand design a secret. And that actually wasn't too difficult. Simulator would keep Sinclair off his back for half of the day, and for the other half, Sinclair would keep Simulator away. The plan worked beautifully. For a while. Ethan skipped the arcade one day, having long since gathered all of the parts necessary for his simulator tube. As he was turning towards the road downtown, the little drone Sinclair sometimes sent his way buzzed towards him. Strange. Usually it waited a while before making itself visible. As it often did, it hovered over Ethan and then suddenly turned off its rotors. It dropped straight towards his open hand, ready to be caught easily. And then it blew apart. Light plastic bits rained down on Ethan, who stepped back in confusion. Was this an attack? Had Sinclair betrayed him? No, this was an incredibly incompetent attack if that was the case. The tiny explosion and minuscule debris were utterly harmless to him. Besides, the drone barely had enough room to house the interference equipment needed to jam any devices listening to him, much less hold some real offensive power. That was it, Ethan suddenly realized. The drone was meant to shield him from simulator spying. Ethan spun around and quickly saw two men in black clothes and face masks holding sophisticated-looking guns. Simulator must have decided to stop playing around. They had found out. Somehow they had found out, and they wanted him. Ethan turned back and sprinted towards the first alleyway he could find. He could feel something sting his shoulder. Tingles rippled across his skin as it started to fall numb. Stunners. The agents were going to take him in alive. Ethan darted around a corner, feeling the hair on the back of his neck abruptly stand up. A near miss had whizzed past his head. He had to stay out of sight or he would be easy pickings for these two. Unfortunately, the alley didn't offer much cover. His only hope was to dash to the other side and round the corner to the next street. But the alley suddenly looked a mile long. He had to try, though. He put everything he had into his sprint. He wasn't even thinking about the individual steps. His eyes were glued to the end of the alleyway, his only focus being on converting willpower to speed. He thought he would make it when he felt a sharp shock in his right leg. He stumbled, barely able to keep himself upright. His random stumbling probably saved him from taking a second invisible bolt to the back. The agents had rounded the corner. Ethan was in their sights. He scrambled quick as he could, but soon it wouldn't matter. Squealing tires preceded two sharp cracks, and the stinging Ethan had anticipated in his back never came. He glanced up just in time to see a large man reach down and grab him under the arms. Before Ethan could ask what was going on, the man pulled Ethan into the SUV as his partner fired two more shots down the alley at the agents, who had ducked back around the corner. As soon as Ethan was inside, they slammed the doors and the car peeled out. "What?" Ethan began, but the big man was already explaining.
"We work for Caldwell Sinclair. We saw you were in trouble."
"Watching me, huh?" Ethan muttered, but he couldn't complain. Sinclair wanted to make sure you always had an escape route ready, just in case something like this happened, the big man explained. Ethan noticed he had flicked a switch on a small device in the middle console. He was confident that it was another signal jammer, although he wondered if that was entirely necessary now that they were speeding away from the covert simulator agents. Not 2 seconds later, switching on the device proved to be prudent. 2 black motorcycles appeared, chasing their SUV. The rear windshield shattered, the shots silent once again. The driver immediately started to swerve as the big man fired back at the motorcycles. "You think that's loud enough?" Ethan asked, ears ringing. His leg and shoulder were still numb and he was trying to rub feeling back into them. "You'd rather we pull over?" the big man asked and fire again as the car swerved once more. "Just saying, there's a noise disparity here," Ethan mumbled. Suddenly, the 2 motorcycles peeled away, disappearing down opposite streets. "What's going on?" the big guy asked, jaw clenched. "Well, at a guess, I'd say you drove them away by launching high-velocity lead in their general direction," Ethan quipped. "They weren't hit," the big guy dismissed. "They're up to something." The SUV still raced down the streets, making its way as fast as it could towards the laudable electronics tower. The big guy scanned the road suspiciously, trying to spot any sign of their assailants. But the roads were quiet. The driver reduced speed and began to actually obey the rules of the road. For some reason, the simulator agents had abruptly abandoned the "There!" the big guy shouted and fired. The bullet sped towards a black motorcycle, hit the fairing, and deflected into the brick facade of the building behind. Before anyone could react, 2 blue beams shot down from above and struck the hood of the SUV. The driver swerved violently, but the hood had already partially melted. He stepped on the gas and they burst forward. Ethan quickly realized that the hood had to have been reinforced, otherwise the 2 beams would have surely cut through the engine block. The driver swerved violently back and forth as more of the blue beams shot down at their vehicle. Ethan was thrown about and his face was nearly slammed against the window. He glanced up as the car weaved again and he saw the source of the beams. A woman with long black hair and dark red armor was flying through the air. A moment after catching sight of her, her red visor glowed blue and then 2 more beams shot from her eyes. The car rocked to the side as the beams struck near the rear wheel well. "They sent Scouter Supreme," the big guy announced to the driver. The driver swore as the big guy pulled out a box from under the back seat. "They couldn't have given us any Zeta sight, could they?" This is bad, isn't it?" Ethan asked. "I mean, when some lady out of a comic book shows up chasing you, you've really screwed up, right?" "Shut up," the big guy said. "Head for the tunnel," he ordered the driver. The SUV swerved violently in a sharp 90-degree turn, barely avoiding another strike of the blue beams. Shooting forward again, they raced for a tunnel. Scouter Supreme reacted quickly, diving down and flying right behind them. The driver reacted quickly by slamming into the rear of another car in the tunnel, sending it spinning out of control into yet another vehicle. Scouter Supreme immediately slowed and flew towards the innocent civilians now injured. Ethan glanced out of the shattered rear window and saw her speak into something on her wrist before helping someone out of the wrecks. "What was that for?" Ethan demanded of the big guy. "She's a government hero. Simulator has a government contract," he explained simply. "You want to go have a chat?" "That didn't mean you had to." "I didn't hear you making any suggestions." The SUV shot out of the tunnel, but strangely, the brightness of the sun didn't return. It was like they were still trapped under a shadow. Ethan and the big guy looked up out the side windows and realized that they were. They were trapped under a shadow of a flying saucer with random vents and tubes bolted on haphazardly, which was flying directly over them. Suddenly, the SUV floated upwards, caught in some sort of tractor beam. Okay, is this usual for you guys?" Ethan asked. "No," the big guy said and fired through the roof at the ship. Unsurprisingly, there was no effect. "All right, then we try it the hard way," he grumbled and reached for a grenade from the box, but he didn't look up towards the sudden spacecraft. He looked down towards the random motorists below. Hey, no!" Ethan shouted. "Then give me an idea," the big guy demanded. Ethan glanced around and immediately saw something promising. The jamming device was going bananas, sparking and displaying surges of random data. Ethan seized it and started fiddling with the controls. "You'd better be a quick study," the big guy said. "Of course I am," Ethan said, holding a couple of buttons and spinning a wheel. The car shuddered. Just as he thought, the tractor beam must have interacted with the waves of the interference machine. By adjusting these waves, maybe he could interfere with the tractor beam itself. But he needed more. He cracked open the casing. "Let me see that box," Ethan demanded. The big guy passed him the box and said, "We're running out of time." And they were. The SUV was halfway up to the flying saucer. Ethan dug through the box, which mostly had weapons or smoke bombs or explosives. There was very little that would help wire this electronic device. But there was, surprisingly, a taser. That wasn't much, but he could do something with it. Ethan worked as fast as he could, changing out a few parts for maximum effect. "That's it, we do it my way," the big guy said. "I told you, I could do this," Ethan said, finishing the final adjustments and cranking the dial. "After all, I am a genius," he declared and pressed the last button. The SUV shuddered and then fell. "Nice going, genius," the big guy shouted just before they slammed into the ground. Everything went hazy around Ethan. The impact had shaken him, and everything was just blurry. But he could hear the sputtering of the tractor beam above him and the screeching of cars trying to steer around them, and an odd hissing noise. Everything got a bit darker and hazier. Ethan was worried he had taken some severe brain damage, but then he started coughing. No, it was something in the air. A strong hand grabbed his collar and someone dragged him through the smoke spreading across the entire street. The big guy shoved Ethan into an alley. "Stay down, stay unseen. We'll drive them away. Someone will come pick you up." Ethan could only cough in response. The big guy shoved the jamming device into his hands, turned, and then vanished, leaving Ethan lost in the smoke. Several minutes later, as everything was clearing, the saucer had landed and a man had exited. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit and was assisting Scouter Supreme in helping the injured. But before Ethan could get a good look at him, some man in a suit tapped on his shoulder. "Mr. Swanson, your ride is here," the man said, gesturing towards a black sedan. Ethan nodded, but the man had already grabbed him and was dragging him into the car. A few minutes later, and they had arrived at the tower.
"We'll deal with the bodyguards in a bit. They'll have to take most of the fall, of course, but we need to do what we can to keep them comfortable." "Yes, discreetly, isn't that obvious? But don't leave them out to dry and point the finger at us," Sinclair said into the phone in his office. Ethan hobbled into the room and slumped into the chair across his desk. "Yes, you know what to do. I have to go," Sinclair said and hung up the phone. He turned to Ethan. "You look terrible."
"Trust me, I feel worse," Ethan replied. "What was that?"
"Obviously, Simulator has stepped up their game. They know you associate with me. The weapons they used give away that it was Simulator, but it was a clever idea to use them. Their weapons were silent, whereas the bodyguards I provided used firearms. Once the shooting starts, all they had to do was call 911 and make sure the bodyguards started shooting. Painted a target right on you."
"So much for Simulator, then. That's okay, I hated that job anyway."
"This means you'll have to move. No sense in staying at the Simulator-provided apartment. Is there anything there you need?"
"Not really. Never stayed there much in the first place."
"That makes things easier. We can set you up somewhere else instead. I presume you don't simply want to sleep in the workshop."
"Honestly, I don't care," Ethan shrugged. "Besides, I have a fancy new jamming device." He held up the rigged jammer. "So I can guarantee my privacy."
"Still not trusting me? Well, the offer is on the table. I wouldn't have wanted to sleep next to all that equipment."
"I call it efficient."
"Whatever you want."
"But, Simulator, they're not going to get back at us, are they?"
"They might try something, but they won't get far. The tower is quite secure, I assure you."
"Well, the more reason to stay in the workshop."
"Fair enough. Don't let this incident distract you, then," Sinclair instructed. "How soon can you get the Ansible and dark matter receptor up and running?"
"Give me a few days, and I should make good progress."
"Excellent. I will ensure there are no other distractions, then."
"Well, there is one other thing."
"Really? What is that?"
"I'm done with the fabricators. You can take them back to Slant City, to the Ethereal Hawk."
"Is this really necessary right now?"
"I think the people there would think so, yeah," Ethan insisted.
Fine. I'll take care of it this evening when I've finished recharging. Is there anything else?"
"Nah, that should be it," Ethan said. "Don't forget that I get to witness all of this, but no, nothing else. You have anything for me?"
"Just get the Ansible and dark energy receptor complete. That's the point."
Right, I will. A few hours later, and Ethan was glancing at a tablet screen while sneaking up to the secret upper chamber of Laudable Electronics. The Gargoyle had held up his end of the bargain and was transmitting his point of view for Ethan to monitor. If he did something Ethan objected to, Ethan could immediately call him off. but Ethan was hoping he wouldn't have to. He had a better idea of what to do with his time, so he was rushing off to the secret hiding place of the Gargoyle's body itself. The Gargoyle, meanwhile, had clutched his clawed feet onto the fabricator and the recycler and activated the dimensional warp. The tablet showed pure white for a moment, and he was engulfed. At the same time, Ethan reached the arched doorway to the housing chamber. Ethan burst through the door and into the dark, domed room. The high-vaulted ceiling echoed every footstep back down to Ethan. He was shocked at how sparse the room was. It was empty aside for a single round base in the middle with a couple of control consoles next to it. Ethan's tablet flashed another color and he glanced at it. The Gargoyle had arrived above the ethereal hawk. Ethan was surprised at how dark the beach was. It wasn't night. The sky had been darkened by clouds. The heart of the storm was nearly upon them. The ethereal hawk was already being ravaged by the storm, which must have been tearing over it for some time by now. And yet, the harshest winds still hadn't reached it. The ship was barely clinging to the mountains. Ethan suddenly realized they hadn't filled in the gaps under the ship. Either they didn't have time, or they had gone ahead with his own plan. But that was impossible. They would never be able to move the ship without the exosuit to help them. The ship rocked, and it hit Ethan. Everyone inside there was in danger. It was his fault. He thought of Kelly Carpenter. Of everyone in peril. The Gargoyle dropped the fabricator roughly in the sand. "Put it in the ship," Ethan said into the comm. "It's just going to get destroyed out there."
"You're not here in the wind," the Gargoyle said as his point of view shifted.
"It doesn't count as giving it back if it gets wrecked," Ethan insisted.
Fine,
the Gargoyle spat. He swooped lower towards the fabricator, aiming to grab it once more. Ethan knew he should be focused on the task in front of him, but he was glued to the monitor as he watched the Gargoyle sway in the violent winds. It looked like he could barely stay in the air. Suddenly, a burst of colors shot from seemingly nowhere at the Gargoyle. Several bolts of energy, green, yellow, blue, and red. The multicolored blasts exploded against the Gargoyle's armor, and he howled. A moment later, both Ethan and he noticed the source of these shots. 4 simulator agents, each decked in their unique colors. Agents red, blue, yellow, and even green, all behind the remnants of the foundation blocks in the beach, firing up at the Gargoyle. It had been a trap, but how had they known? Ethan quickly realized they hadn't been expecting the Gargoyle, they had been expecting him. They knew he had been allied with the people of the Ethereal Hawk. After their ambush in the real world had failed, they set up this ambush in the other dimension in the hopes of catching him off guard and stealing back the exosuit. Now, instead, they were striking out against the Gargoyle. It suddenly occurred to Ethan that was great. Good, let them take care of each other.
"I'm pulling out," the Gargoyle announced.
Ethan desperately tried to think of an excuse to keep the Gargoyle there. Simulator beat him to the punch.
"What? My recall function isn't working," he declared.
A status display scrolled up his field of vision and across Ethan's tablet. The long and short of it was that the agents were somehow suppressing his dimension warp tech. The Gargoyle charged at the agents, and Ethan realized he had to seize the moment. He dropped the tablet, ignoring the suddenly shifting blur of sand and energy blasts as the Gargoyle engaged with the simulator agents, desperately searching for the source of the interference. Ethan grabbed the first console next to the platform. He immediately broke through the security program and desperately searched for the information he needed. He needed to know where a certain piece of hardware was. There had to be a backup. A backup for the dimensional warp. Yes, there was, but it wasn't hooked up to the system. No, there wasn't much time remaining. Ethan glanced back towards the tablet. The Gargoyle had just tossed Yellow through the air into the corner of one of the foundation blocks. Yellow vanished a moment later, no doubt using one of those time tokens. Ethan turned back to the console in front of him. He tore through the information contained within. There had to be something he could use. There was a schematic of the device within the console. Ethan knew what it looked like now, but that didn't mean anything. The room was empty. If the device wasn't here, it could be... Ethan suddenly realized where it was. He rushed over to the little platform and ran his hands along the edge until he found a handle. He pulled out the little drawer, and there it was. An octagonal plate, the backup dimensional warp. Ethan seized it immediately and kicked the drawer closed.
"Finally, warping back," the Gargoyle announced.
Ethan clutched the plate to his chest and ran straight for the door, scooping up his tablet just in time. A flash of light filled the room just as Ethan pulled the door closed. He didn't stop, but stumbled down the stairs, retreating to his workshop. He wasn't halfway there when the Gargoyle's voice came through the tablet.
Swanson, I'm not going back. If you have a problem with leaving the fabricator on the beach, I'll throw you in there. You got that? He demanded.
Ethan stopped, trying to calm his breathing. He pressed the transmit button. Yeah, fine, he said, and then muted himself again.
Good. I have to take care of this battle damage. You better not have any demands for a while.
And then the tablet's feed cut out. Good, Ethan thought. That worked just perfectly. Now he had to get this plate to the exosuit, and to get himself to the simulator tube. Kelly Carpenter stumbled through the halls of the Ethereal Hawk as the winds intensified. She glanced at the monitor she had been watching a moment before. The 4 simulator agents each vanished in a bright flare of light. If only the storm could vanish as suddenly. But no. The ship rocked again, tossing Kelly off her feet. Only the sudden appearance of a pair of arms catching her prevented her from getting a concussion from slamming into the wall.
Watch your step, Administrator Cabot warned belatedly, picking Kelly back up. We're really in a mess now, aren't we?
I have to get down to the engineering bay, Kelly announced. Our only hope is to fire the engines, plow ourselves into the beach.
Miss Carpenter, you know the engines won't fire anymore, Cabot reminded her.
What choice do I have? She countered. The ship rocked again and the two steadied themselves. But something was different about the movement. It tilted a little more slowly, and when another shuddering gust of wind struck the hull, the ship didn't shift so dramatically. Something's different, Kelly noted.
Did someone already fire the engines? Cabot guessed wildly.
No, look, Kelly announced in shock. She pointed at one of the screens. Cabot's eyes widened as he saw a familiar green exosuit braving the storm. Ethan's avatar grabbed one of the violently flailing, ultra-strong cords. A spray of rain flew towards his suit, but just before it struck him, all of the water suddenly whooshed around him. A shield of water had suddenly formed around him, turning the rain from him as he heaved with immense strength. Slowly, digging his feet into the rock and then sand, Ethan dragged the cable towards one of the foundation blocks. He found the connection point and secured it tightly. He then forced the suit through the gale towards the next cable. The cables! Get the rest of the cables! Kelly immediately ordered.
This is crazy, Cabot declared.
Before Kelly could chide him for throwing away their only shot, Cabot clarified by adding,
He's actually out in the storm.
Yeah, he is, Kelly agreed. But we don't know how long he can keep this up.
Right, the cables, Cabot said, realizing the predicament.
He rushed to the port and Kelly rushed starboard. Outside, Ethan marched back towards the beach as a fresh assault of wind and rain met him. The storm was reaching its strongest point. Each step was a battle, but the suit would not be deterred, even as it was approaching maximum power. Kelly scrambled towards a hatch where 2 more cables were coiled, waiting to be lowered out of the ship. She put the ends in the feeder and readied to open the hatch. "Hold it, Carpenter," a voice boomed from the speaker overhead. "Commander Errol, if we don't," Kelly protested, but the commander cut her off. "Don't open the hatch just yet. You'll let in the wind and unbalance the ship. Wait for our friend to return to your point." "Right. Understood. You'll let me know?" "Affirmative." Not a minute later, and the commander announced, "Now, Miss Carpenter." She heaved on a lever, and suddenly the cabin was filled with a swirling, violent rush of air. It took her a moment to stumble back towards the coiled machines and force them to lower the cables. Except, the cables just flew back into the room. Kelly tried desperately to grab onto one of the ends and to fling it back through the hatch, but the wind and rain were just too powerful. She just managed to grab a hold of one of them again and was glancing around for something heavy to attach it to when a mechanical arm shot up through the hatch and grabbed it. Ethan's exosuit looked up at Kelly and nodded. She released the cable and fetched the second one. When she had it, she struggled to bring it over to the suit. As soon as it was close, Ethan grabbed it as well and then immediately dropped back down. Kelly sealed the hatch again, now soaked from the rain. "Miss Carpenter," Commander Errol said, "we could use you in engineering. These winches could use your expert touch." She ignored the stitch in her side and answered immediately, "On my way." As she dashed towards the engineering section, Ethan's suit was trudging its way back out with the last 2 cables. Even with the storm at its peak and his suit exerting all of its energy, no obstacle could stop him. He reached the foundation blocks and attached the cables. The suit turned back towards the giant ship and flashed a large light. "I think that's our cue," Commander Errol said. "Activating the winches," Kelly replied and flipped the switches. The ship shuddered once more, and this time it didn't subside. But the ship didn't tilt, it didn't flip, it just vibrated, and slowly it moved. Ethan watched as the ship was pulled from its position on the mountain. All at once, the gale force winds found their way underneath the ship, and it took off. It suddenly raised into the air, and then was abruptly halted in its ascent by the cables. "Retracting cables," Kelly announced over all the sounds of loose equipment in the trembling ship. Slowly, the enormous round ship began to make its way towards the beach, towards the foundation blocks. Ethan walked around the perimeter of where the ship would eventually land. The water around him surged and he guided it into a wedge shape and then dug it into the sand. He began to cut through all of the sand, pushing it up and aside, slowly working a pattern as the ship came ever closer. Ethan used the force of the storm itself to dig into the sand until a large hole, big enough to seat the ship, was finished. Suddenly, one of the cables snapped. The ship tilted violently. Inside, Kelly barely clung onto her control panel as engineers all around her tumbled to one side. Winch-controlled whined in protest as the careful balance was thrown off. "How could a cable break?" Commander Errol demanded, but no one was able to answer him. And suddenly, the ship righted again. Finally able to glance at the screen again, Kelly and Commander Errol saw something incredible. Ethan's suit had leapt into the air and grabbed the end of the cable dangling from the ship. As soon as they saw him do that, his engine flared with power and he rushed towards the other half of the cable. He caught it and held it, his suit bridging the gap. "Get us down, now," Errol demanded. "That suit won't hold the entire ship." That was an exaggeration because there were several other cables, but the point was still valid. Kelly grabbed the controls once more and frantically sped the process. She switched between overworking various winches in a unique sequence to maximize the descent. Ethan's suit was flashing a pattern of light up at the ship. Kelly couldn't decode it, but she intuitively understood. She held off on working the winch connected to the broken cable as they nearly reached the foundation blocks. Ethan dropped the cable connected to the foundation block and raced down with the half connected to the ship. He rushed towards the block and pulled the cable into the feed. The ship shuddered. Now so close to the ground, the wind was bouncing up into the bottom of the hull even more fiercely. No way could Ethan's suit pull the cable. Kelly worked the winches, but the ship still resisted. They needed every last one of them. And then suddenly, they had them. Ethan shoved the cable into the feed and pulled. The enormous ship sank, approaching the hole Ethan had just dug. And then, with a final shudder, the ship came to a stop, resting in the perfect nest. Kelly flicked between the camera feeds on the screen until one showing a hatch on the bottom of the ship appeared. The green exosuit stood there, knocking casually at the hatch. "Unbelievable," Kelly breathed. "He withstood the entire Tempest." "No, Miss Carpenter," Commander Errol said reverently. "A man with that determination is the Tempest." At long last, the final iteration, the last draft, the ultimate build of the mechanized hero is complete. The robotic avatar, now known as Tempest, has been realized, and his power has been displayed. What more will be unleashed, and what is left to stop Ethan from achieving his remaining goals? Hear his incredible feats next time on the Mirage Barrage.